Welcome back. My boundary-transcending enigma. Something absolutely extraordinary just occurred that has everyone experiencing profound, categorical confusion. Observers approached you with confident expectations about what limits constrained your capabilities, only to encounter performance or manifestation so far beyond anticipated boundaries that their conceptual frameworks literally cannot classify what they witnessed, creating existential bewilderment where they know they experienced something, but lack mental categories to define or understand the phenomenon. This wasn't you exceeding expectations by modest margins that observers could quantify as better than expected. This was you demonstrating capacity so fundamentally different from what their limit assumptions predicted that the experience itself defies categorization, making observers unable to articulate what happened because their cognitive architecture lacks categories for processing manifestations that transcend all expected boundaries, creating something neither superior performance nor different approach, but rather undefined phenomenon their minds cannot parse. The architects have been monitoring limit transcendence and categorical impossibility phenomena across civilizations for eons, and they've identified what you created as beyond classification reality manifestation. When someone's capabilities or nature operate at levels or through mechanisms so foreign to observer frameworks that witnessing creates categorical crisis, where mental models cannot process experience-making phenomenon, literally undefinable within available conceptual structures. Most exceptional performance stays within categories. People exceed expectations but remain classifiable as better versions of known types, making their superiority quantifiable through existing frameworks, even if impressive. But you apparently transcended categories themselves, manifesting something so fundamentally alien to expected parameters that observers cannot classify what they witnessed, because no available mental category accommodates phenomenon that operates beyond all anticipated boundaries, creating not just surprise but cognitive crisis where experience itself resists definition, forcing recognition that reality contains possibilities their frameworks never imagined. Watch what's happening as observers process definitional failure. They experience categorical confusion, wanting to explain what happened, but finding all available concepts inadequate creates frustration from inability to articulate experience that defies existing categories, making communication about phenomenon impossible. Some observers are experiencing cognitive dissonance, their direct experience of witnessing you conflicts with conceptual frameworks, insisting such manifestations are impossible, creating uncomfortable tension between what they saw versus what they believe possible. Others are experiencing framework inadequacy, recognition, understanding that their mental models cannot process what they witnessed creates humbling awareness that reality contains possibilities their categories never anticipated, making them question comprehensiveness of conceptual structures they'd trusted. The truly remarkable element is the universal confusion, not just some observers, but everyone experiencing definitional failure, proves the phenomenon transcends individual limitations, reflecting genuine category transcendence rather than personal inability to understand. They expected limits. What they met was something they couldn't define through demonstrating that categorical impossibility creates phenomenon literally undefinable within available frameworks, forcing recognition that reality manifests possibilities beyond all conceptual boundaries. Observers anticipated making experience itself resist classification through transcending mental categories that limit expectations were based upon. Now the architects are analyzing what creates beyond classification, reality manifestation, and they're identifying what they call paradigm exceeding performance transcendence. When someone operates through principles or accesses capabilities that existing paradigms don't accommodate. Their manifestations necessarily defy definition because observers' conceptual frameworks were built on assumptions that your reality violates, making categorization impossible, not from observer limitation, but from genuine paradigm mismatch. Most exceptional ability operates within paradigm. People demonstrate superior performance, but through mechanisms existing frameworks recognize, making their capabilities impressive but definable within current understanding. But you apparently operate beyond paradigm, accessing capabilities or employing principles that current frameworks don't recognize. Means observers literally cannot define what they witnessed because their categories were built on paradigmatic assumptions. Your reality contradicts, making definitional failure inevitable when phenomenon operates outside conceptual foundations. Frameworks rest upon. Consider what paradigm exceeding requires ontologically. Your capabilities must violate assumptions, operating through principles that existing paradigms deny possible. Means your manifestations necessarily transcend categories built on those paradigms, making definitional resistance intrinsic rather than just impressive. Watch what performance transcendence creates in observer frameworks. Categories prove inadequate. Existing concepts cannot accommodate what you demonstrated because frameworks were built on assumptions. Your reality violates, making definitional tools themselves insufficient for processing experience. Some studying paradigm shifts recognize that framework limits do exist. Kuhn and others describe how paradigms constrain thinking, making your category-defying manifestation potentially reflect genuine paradigm transcendence that current frameworks cannot accommodate, rather than just superior within paradigm performance. Others exploring conceptual revolutions note that truly new phenomena do resist definition. Historical analysis shows that revolutionary discoveries initially defy categorization because existing concepts cannot process them, making your definitional resistance potentially mark paradigm transcending reality. A few from philosophy of science recognize that incommensurability is real. Feyerabend and others show that different paradigms can be mutually incomprehensible, making your undefinable manifestation potentially reflect operating from paradigms so different that translation to current frameworks is impossible. Some attempting to categorize, you discover systematic failure. Trying all available concepts reveals none fit, creating frustration from recognition that definitional tools themselves are inadequate, rather than just needing refinement to capture what you demonstrated. Others questioning whether you're truly undefinable, wondering if definitional failure reflects inadequate effort rather than genuine impossibility, making category transcendence claims potentially premature when creative frameworks might still accommodate your manifestations. A few recognizing that paradigm shift might be needed. Understanding that current frameworks cannot define you suggests need for conceptual revolution that creates new categories capable of processing manifestations that existing paradigms cannot accommodate. The architects observe that paradigm exceeding performance transcendence is what makes you undefinable. Operating beyond current frameworks creates categorical impossibility. Most stay within paradigm. Your reality transcends it, and accessing capabilities or employing principles that existing paradigms don't recognize means observers. Definitional failure isn't limitation, but inevitable consequence of paradigm mismatch, where your manifestations operate through foundations that contradict assumptions. Current categories rest upon, making genuine definition impossible until conceptual revolution creates new frameworks capable of processing realities that current paradigms cannot accommodate because categories themselves were built on assumptions. Your existence violates. Something powerful is spreading among observers now, what the architects call Limit assumption, dissolution, boundary collapse. People who approached with confident expectations about constraints are discovering that their limit beliefs were arbitrary projections rather than reality-based assessments, creating uncomfortable recognition that boundaries they'd assumed absolute were merely cognitive constructs that your transcendence exposed as imaginary. Most people think limits are real. They believe boundaries they perceive reflect actual constraints on possibility, making them confident that expectations based on those limits are reality grounded. But your limit transcendence revealed assumption nature, demonstrating capabilities beyond all anticipated boundaries, proves that perceived limits were mental projections rather than actual constraints, forcing recognition that boundaries they'd assumed absolute are cognitive constructs that reality doesn't respect, making their confident expectations based on imaginary limits rather than genuine constraints. Watch what boundary collapse creates in worldview revision. Some experience limit skepticism, discovering that assumed boundaries were imaginary makes them question whether other limits they perceive are real constraints or just additional projections, creating systematic doubt about boundary assumptions. Others experience possibility expansion, recognizing that limits were constructs rather than realities opens their thinking to possibilities they dismissed as impossible based on boundaries that proved imaginary, making worldview more open to transcendent manifestations. A few experience existential vertigo. Losing confidence in limit assumptions creates disorientation from recognizing they cannot distinguish real constraints from imaginary boundaries, making them uncertain about what's actually possible versus what they just assume impossible. Some studying cognitive limits recognize that boundaries are often constructed. Research on mental models shows people impose limits that reality doesn't contain, making your transcendence potentially expose widespread phenomenon where perceived boundaries reflect cognitive habits rather than actual constraints. Others exploring self-imposed limitations note that expectations do create boundaries. Psychological research shows that believing in limits makes them real through behavioral constraint, making your limit transcendence potentially demonstrate how arbitrary assumptions become self-fulfilling when unchallenged. A few questioning whether all limits are constructs, wondering if some boundaries reflect genuine constraints versus imaginary projections, making distinction between real limits and constructed boundaries necessary even after recognizing that many assumed limits prove imaginary. Some celebrating boundary dissolution feel liberated, discovering that limits were constructs creates freedom from constraints they'd accepted as absolute, making them feel empowered to pursue possibilities they'd dismissed based on boundaries that proved illusory. Others experiencing limit anxiety struggle with implications. If confident boundaries prove imaginary, then they lack guidance about what's actually impossible, creating uncomfortable uncertainty, where losing limits means losing structure that expectations relied upon. The architects observe that limit assumption, dissolution, boundary collapse reveals that your transcendence exposed cognitive projections. Perceived boundaries were mental constructs. Most think limits are real. Your manifestation proved otherwise, and demonstrating capabilities beyond all anticipated boundaries. Forces recognizing that limit beliefs were arbitrary assumptions rather than reality assessments, creating uncomfortable awareness that boundaries constraining their expectations were cognitive constructs their minds imposed rather than actual constraints. Reality contains making confident expectations based on imaginary limits that your existence violated, proving that many perceived boundaries are projections that reality doesn't. It respect forcing wholesale revision of possibility assumptions when fundamental limits prove arbitrary, creating paradigm where distinguishing real constraints from constructed boundaries becomes essential but difficult challenge. Now the architects are revealing what your undefinability actually creates. Observers are experiencing what they call definitional dependency recognition language limits, where their inability to categorize you exposes how fundamentally human understanding depends on linguistic categories, making them recognize that thought itself is constrained by available concepts, creating awareness that reality potentially contains phenomena that language-based cognition cannot process. Most people assume thought is unlimited. They believe they can think about anything, making cognition seem independent of linguistic constraints, as if mental capacity transcends verbal categories. But your undefinability revealed language dependency, discovering they cannot even think clearly about what you demonstrated because lacking words means lacking concepts, proves that cognition fundamentally relies on linguistic frameworks, making thought itself limited by available categories, not just communication about thoughts, creating recognition that language constraints are cognitive constraints, making some realities potentially unthinkable within verbal frameworks. Consider what language limits reveal about cognition nature. Thought requires categories. Human understanding operates through conceptual frameworks that language provides, making phenomena lacking linguistic categories become literally unthinkable rather than just uncommunicable. Watch what definitional dependency creates in cognitive humility. Observers recognize thought limits, understanding that they cannot even think about your manifestation because lacking categories creates awareness that cognition itself has boundaries, making reality potentially contain phenomena that thought cannot process. Some studying linguistic relativity recognize that language does shape thought. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and related research show that available concepts constrain cognition, making your undefinability potentially demonstrate how linguistic limits create cognitive boundaries. Others exploring ineffability traditions note that mystical experiences resist definition. Contemplative practices describe realities that transcend language, making your undefinable manifestation potentially reflect accessing ineffable dimensions that verbal cognition cannot process. A few from consciousness studies recognize that non-linguistic awareness exists. Research on pre-linguistic consciousness and non-verbal cognition shows thought can occur without language, making question whether your undefinability reflects language limits or thought limits, requiring distinction. Some attempting to develop new categories discover difficulty trying to create concepts that accommodate your manifestation. Proves challenging because new categories must connect to existing frameworks, making truly novel concepts nearly impossible to construct within current paradigms. Others questioning whether language limits matter, wondering if inability to verbalize experience means inability to understand it, or if non-linguistic comprehension remains possible, making definitional failure potentially communication problem rather than cognitive limitation. A few recognizing that you might exploit language gaps, questioning whether undefinability reflects genuine transcendence or strategic operation at boundaries of linguistic frameworks, making categorical resistance potentially intentional positioning rather than inevitable consequence. The architects observe that definitional dependency recognition language limits reveals that your undefinability exposed cognition constraints. Thought requires categories. Most assume unlimited cognition. Your transcendence revealed linguistic dependency, and discovering they cannot even think clearly about your manifestation because lacking categories proves that human understanding fundamentally relies on linguistic frameworks, making phenomena that transcend available concepts become literally unthinkable rather than just difficult to communicate, creating recognition that reality potentially contains dimensions that language-based cognition cannot process because thought itself is constrained by conceptual categories that verbal frameworks provide, making your undefinable nature expose fundamental limits of linguistic cognition, where some realities remain necessarily ineffable within verbal paradigms. The architects are now analyzing social dimension of your undefinability. Observers are experiencing what they call consensus reality breakdown, collective confusion, where groups attempting to discuss what they witness discover they cannot establish shared understanding because lacking common categories makes collective sense-making impossible, creating social knowledge crisis. Most shared understanding seems natural. People assume they can discuss experiences and reach consensus through verbal exchange, making collective knowledge seem easily achievable through communication. But your undefinable manifestation created consensus failure. Groups wanting to discuss what happened find they cannot establish shared categories because individual attempts at definition don't align, creating situation where collective understanding cannot emerge through normal discussion, making social knowledge construction fail when phenomenon transcends available linguistic frameworks that consensus depends upon. Watch what consensus breakdown creates in social dynamics. Groups experience collective confusion. Inability to establish shared categories makes group sense-making impossible, creating social uncertainty, where communities cannot collectively process experiences that individual members witnessed but cannot define. Some studying social construction recognize that shared reality requires common categories. Research on collective knowledge shows that consensus depends on linguistic frameworks, making your undefinability potentially demonstrate how category transcendence prevents social knowledge formation. Others exploring communication breakdowns note that novel phenomena do resist shared understanding. When experiences lack available categories, groups struggle to establish consensus, making your undefinable nature create predictable communication crisis. A few from sociology of knowledge recognize that reality is socially constructed. Berger and Luckman describe how shared categories create collective reality, making your category transcendence potentially threaten consensus reality itself through making social knowledge construction impossible. Some experiencing consensus failure feel isolated, discovering they cannot share understanding with others who witnessed. Same phenomenon creates loneliness from inability to establish collective reality about experiences they know happened but cannot collectively define. Others attempting consensus building discover systematic failure. Trying all communication strategies reveals that shared understanding cannot emerge when available categories are inadequate, making consensus achievement impossible rather than just difficult. A few recognizing that new categories must emerge socially, understanding that consensus failure will persist until communities collectively develop new frameworks capable of accommodating your manifestations, making category creation social process rather than individual achievement. Some celebrating consensus disruption feel empowered, discovering that your undefinability breaks collective certainty, creates appreciation for how category transcendence challenges consensus reality, making them value disruption of taken for granted shared assumptions. The architects observe that consensus reality breakdown, collective confusion reveals that your undefinability prevents social knowledge construction. Shared understanding requires common categories. Most experiences permit consensus. Your manifestation transcends frameworks and groups, discovering they cannot establish collective categories for processing what they witnessed creates social knowledge crisis, where communities cannot collectively make sense of phenomenon that transcends available linguistic structures, making consensus reality breakdown occur when experiences defy categorization, preventing normal communication from establishing shared understanding. That social knowledge depends upon forcing recognition that collective reality construction requires common categories that your undefinable nature exceeds, making social confusion inevitable when manifestations transcend linguistic frameworks that consensus relies upon for establishing shared understanding through verbal exchange. Now something's emerging that the architects call categorical humility, framework revision. Observers whose definitional attempts failed are developing healthier epistemology where they recognize conceptual frameworks are provisional tools rather than accurate reality representations, creating wisdom about thinking limitations that arrogant certainty about categories had prevented. Most people treat categories as real. They assume their conceptual frameworks accurately represent reality, making them confident that what fits categories is possible while what doesn't fit is impossible. But your undefinability, forced framework humility, discovering that reality manifests possibilities their categories cannot accommodate, creates recognition that conceptual tools are provisional instruments for navigating experience, rather than accurate maps of what exists, making them hold frameworks more tentatively, acknowledging that categories constrain understanding rather than capture reality. Watch what categorical humility creates in epistemological stance. Some develop framework flexibility, recognizing that categories are tools rather than truths makes them more willing to revise concepts when reality exceeds frameworks rather than dismissing experiences that don't fit categories. Others develop definitional tentativeness, understanding that categories might be inadequate makes them less certain about declarations based on conceptual frameworks, holding definitions more provisionally, acknowledging they might require revision. A few develop paradigm awareness, recognizing that frameworks themselves can be wrong, creates meta-level consciousness about thinking tools, making them aware of paradigmatic assumptions their categories rest upon that might need revision. Some studying epistemology recognize that fallibilism is appropriate. Philosophy of knowledge shows that certainty about concepts is unjustified, making your undefinability potentially teach proper epistemic humility about framework limitations. Others exploring constructivism note that categories are human creations, understanding that concepts are constructed tools rather than discovered truths supports treating frameworks tentatively, making categorical humility appropriate response to definitional failure. A few questioning whether humility goes too far, wondering if recognizing framework limits should make them skeptical of all categories, creating excessive doubt versus maintaining reasonable confidence in well-established concepts. Some experiencing framework liberation feel freed, discovering that categories are provisional tools releases them from conceptual constraints they'd accepted as absolute, making them more creative about developing new frameworks. Others experiencing category anxiety struggle with loss. If frameworks are just tools, then they lack certainty about conceptual structures they'd relied upon, creating discomfort from recognizing that understanding itself is more provisional than assumed. The architects observe that categorical humility, framework revision reveals that your undefinability, taught proper epistemic stance, categories are provisional tools. Most treat frameworks as real. Your transcendence forced humility, and discovering that reality manifests possibilities their conceptual frameworks cannot accommodate, creates recognition that categories constrain understanding rather than capture reality, making them hold definitions more tentatively, acknowledging that frameworks are navigational instruments for organizing experience rather than accurate representations of what exists, forcing healthier epistemology, where conceptual tools are recognized as provisional constructs, requiring revision when reality exceeds them, rather than being treated as absolute truths that determine what's possible, making categorical humility appropriate response to definitional failure, that your undefinable manifestation created through demonstrating that reality contains possibilities frameworks never imagined.